Yeah.
Okay, so everyone must okay it. There we go.
Mark.
Okay, and then make me the host.
Yeah. And then where have you gone?
Hi, sorry I'm late.
That's fine.
It's all right, Chris.
I've had to wash up.
Good. I'm glad you washed up, Chris. Cleanliness is next to godliness. You know how that goes.
Yeah.
There we go. So yes.
Okay, so Derek, tell me when we're there.
There we go. We're up and running, Gordon.
Okay, shit, I've lost you guys. There we go. Ah, there we go. Okay, so what I think we should do is let's mute our audio, and if anyone has a question, right, ask it on the spot. So just unmute audio and ask the question. We don't need to wait till afterwards. Ask it while it's fresh in your head. Okay, so basically tonight, all I want to really talk about is the idea of finding the essence of what you're trying to do when you're tying. A friend of mine the other day said to me, he said, you know, Gordon, if fly tying was a religion, you'd be a Buddhist. Because what I tend to do nowadays is I simplify things down to such an extent that you can't really simplify them further. I don't like patterns that take an hour to tie, you know. I do sometimes tie classic salmon flies, and those do take hours to tie, but that's not about fly tying. That's something else for me. But if I'm tying flies to, you know, for my fly box, I want to be able to tie them quickly, and they need to be effective. So my whole mission with fly tying has always been to focus on tying purpose-driven patterns. I always think when you're tying a fly, what you're actually doing is you're plotting the downfall of a fish. That's what you're doing. You're thinking about, what do I need to do? What does this fly need to do to get to this fish? So the function, what it needs to do, the purpose, is always the first thing I start with. You can tie a fantastic fly, but if it doesn't get to the fish, it doesn't help you, you know. So every single element on that fly is purpose-driven, from the hook you're using, to the thread you're using, to every single material on that fly. In modern fly tying, very often there's a lot of materials on flies which are superfluous. They don't need to be there, but they're there. Why? Because some person said, oh, you need this. If this is not on the fly, it's not catching fish. And a lot of us buy into what I like to call the silver bullet syndrome. We think that particular patterns catch us fish. And what's even more important than the fly is the guy on the other end of the rod. Because you can have the best tackle on earth, you can have the best flies, you can have the best everything. But if you don't know how to use them properly, then that doesn't help you either. So all of these things have a symbiotic relationship, you know. So yeah, so my approach is extremely simple. I'm supposed to be this good fly tyer, but if I look at most of the flies I tie, a 7-year-old could tie them. In fact, my sons do tie them. You know, very often when I get lazy, my little sons tie flies for me. And the thing about tying is they don't need to be neat. You don't have to tie these perfect looking flies. All they need to do is fish perfectly. You know, so if you're tying a mayfly, it needs to sit on the water in a particular way. It needs to not twist tippets while you're casting. It's just got to be functional. You know, some of the best fishermen I know are not necessarily good fly tyers. There's actually a video online of Frank Sawyer tying a pheasant tail nymph and a pheasant tail spinner. Has anyone seen that video? what's
Yes,
actually,
Gordon, I've got it.
have you got it? Okay.
Yeah.
Now notice something. The entire length of that video is, I think, 4 minutes and 36 seconds. And in that video, he ties 2 flies. So he ties them quick. And he's not a particularly careful fly tyer. He's not, I won't call him a great fly tyer. But notice something. He tied very effective flies. Why? Because he understood what he needed them to do. So my whole approach, stems from that. I look at flies and I look at, and I love Oliver Edwards and I love Steve Thornton and I love all of that stuff. But the reality is this, it's not necessary. If you want to do that because it fulfills you and you like doing it, do it. But if we are speaking catching fish, you don't need gills on a mayfly nymph. You don't. I don't think fish care. What you do need is to get the fly to the fish. So if the fish are hugging the bottom, you've got to get the fly down. That's what you've got to do. When I was a kid, people used to always write about how a fly needed to look like the natural. And people would then tie their flies to look like the natural. But we tend to think that a fly needs to sort of appeal to our senses, but we forget we need to appeal to fish. So very often what's more important is how the fly behaves in the drift and what it does. So that's basically my approach. In fact, my whole fly tying kit, I've one box, one toolbox, and that's my entire kit. I don't do a lot of stillwater fishing, so mostly streams, but and the materials I have are basic, and can be used for many different things. I don't believe you need 500 different colors of thread. I just don't. I have 3 spools of thread I work with most of the time. 70 denier Danville's, 17.0 Uni Trico, and 14 Ort Griffith shear. That's it. Those are the threads I use. And generally in a lighter color as well, like a tan or a white, because I can then make markings on the thread, Materials, wild mallard CDC, brilliant, love it. Biots, I love biots. Peacock herl, pheasant tail, nothing extravagant, nothing expensive. Yes, I have Hackle. I love decent Hackle as well. But yeah, you don't need 3 cupboards full of fly tying materials to tie effective flies. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you through. Let me just get this right. I'm going to take you through a couple of these flies of mine. Here we go. Okay, so can everyone see this? Okay, so this is a very simple hopper pattern I like to tie, okay? And what I wanted to get right with this fly was 3 things. I wanted to have the correct profile. If you look at that, look at the legs. I wanted it to plop in the water, okay? Because when hoppers land in the water, they plop. And then the third thing I needed was movement. Because when a hopper lands in the water, the first thing it does is it starts kicking like hell, An interesting thing is where I live, there is a little fly and it actually lays its eggs in the hopper, okay? And then a little worm basically starts developing in the hoppers. And it basically grows and is a parasite. And it'll then eat the hopper from the inside out. Eventually, the hopper is in so much pain that the thing will actually commit suicide and jump into the stream. And this happens every single year with these hoppers on these streams I fish. So they're quite effective. The plop's important. Notice something. That hook is quite a thickish hook, right? And it needs to be because the foam is quite dense. If this was a fine wire dry fly hook, this thing would land on its back, which wouldn't help you very much. Okay, so that's what I look at. You know, you get a lot of patterns, especially hoppers, that are a lot more complicated, that look to us a lot more like hoppers, but I don't think you'll find a hopper that's more effective than this. And this thing takes 5 minutes to tie, 5 minutes straight, no problem. Okay, so these are the hooks I like to tie them on streamer hooks. And this is a fairly biggish one, a size 10. Okay. And then I'm a fan of lava lace dry fly foam. Lava lace dry fly foam is an efferzote foam. So it's got these lovely little air chambers in it. I'll show you later when we get a close-up. Well, let's actually go back to this. If you look here, look at those little air chambers in it. It makes it extremely buoyant, but what it also does is, look at how nicely it compresses under thread tension. Look at the round look you get there. Very natural, it's nice. Okay. So the first thing I do whenever I tie almost any fly is I lay a thread foundation. And over here, I'm using 70 denier Danville's. A flat thread is very important because you can cover a wide surface area with minimal thread. Also, when working with foam, you've got to work with flat thread. If you don't, very often you can actually cut through this foam that you've tied in. And what I like doing is, I like marking out, before I tie anything on, I like marking out where everything needs to be. So for this particular hopper, 1/3 of the shank is the head of the fly, and the remaining 2/3 I divide into 3 body sections, okay? And then I'll tie this foam in, 2 wraps, lift the foam up, tie the next section in, and I'll tie that in at the marks I've made. You can see these marks here. There's a mark there, there was a mark there, and I'll tie it in, just like that. So you've got 3 body sections, and then I'll tie in the head section, just like that. So that's just one piece of foam. Then I'll bring my thread over, like that, to this section over there. And then I like using a bit of squirrel for an underwing. Now, our hoppers in South Africa, a lot of them have red underwings, and that's like a major trigger. So a little bit of red in a fly just, works wonders. Now you'll notice these hairs are standing up like crazy, and that's because they're in that sort of groove or gap over there. That's not a problem. We'll sort that out later. So what I generally do is I stack these things to get them sort of even, and then I tie them in, okay? And then I'll cut off the excess. It's always a good idea when you do this sort of thing to put like a drop of Zappa Gap in there, just as insurance, let it seep into there. Not a lot, just a little. And then I tie in an elk hair wing. And the important thing here is the quality of the hair. Quality materials play a massive role in the effectiveness of a fly. And very often with nymphs and with wets, you can get away with inferior materials, but with dry flies, you won't, because what happens is, if the materials are bad, the fly will just sink, and that sort of negates the whole purpose of the thing in the first place. So if you look at this hair here, fairly straight fibers, okay, nice thick tips, clean thick tips, and that's, and when you actually feel the hair between thumb and forefinger, it'll have a sponge-like texture. The hair will sort of almost bounce back on you. If the hair is soft, like dog hair, no good. So selecting materials effectively is quite important. And that's one of the reasons I don't like buying online. There are few people I'll buy online from. The one person I'll buy from is Let me just let these guys in. The one guy I'll sort of buy from is Steve Cooper, because Steve Cooper like understands the concept of quality. But I won't just buy from anyone. So this is a bit of Elke, and notice nice straight fibers, curve in fibers, not good. Frizz, fine, but curve, not good. Difficult to work with. Okay, and here I tie in the wing. I've stacked it, I've tied it in, and I've trimmed it right down. And once again, little drop off, zap a gap, just helps you. Now, when I fold this foam over like this and tie it in, it presses the wing down, okay? Remember I was telling you about all those little air chambers? Look at that. The other nice thing about this foam is that it sits in the fold. Okay, and that's quite an interesting thing. If you look at terrestrials, you'll notice something. If you look at ants, if you look at grasshoppers, if you look at beetles, all those things will sit in the film. They're not like a mayfly or a sedge that sits on top of the film. They'll sit in the film. And that's what you want. The fly needs to be nice and deep in the film. This foam that does that, that helps you. Okay. Cut off the excess. And now I'm going to use some variegated thin rubber strands and tie them in one by one. One on the far side, one on the near side. Now, sometimes what happens when you're tying terrestrials is the angle of these legs, okay, is sometimes very narrow. And to get them wider, what you need to do is take your thread and tuck it in behind the head of the fly and tuck it right in under the legs. And what that'll do is that'll increase the angle of the legs between the front and the hind legs. Now that's important because when you twitch this fly, these legs will sort of compress backwards, but when you leave it, they'll bounce back into this shape. And very often that will trigger a response. I've seen it. I was once fishing with a guy and I was standing on top of a rock, okay? And I was sighting fish for him and he was fishing this hopper. And he would twitch the hopper and I'd see trout coming off the bottom, like missiles, coming straight up for the fly and then eating him. And the interesting thing was this. When they came up from the bottom, their mouths were already open. So the fish had made the decision from the bottom of the stream. He wasn't swimming up, then deciding, and then eating the fly. He'd made his mind up. So movement is quite an important thing. And once again, I mean, totally simple. There's nothing to this fly. You can tie this in 3, 4, 5 minutes flat. Any questions?
How about color of the legs? Does that matter?
Okay, so what I tend to find is, I don't think it matters really. The main thing for me is the profile of the legs. Spanflex works well. This thin round rubber works well. Silicone legs can also work well. I like Spanflex is actually the best material for the legs because it's not too straight. It's buggy. I like it. Color. Now, a lot of people say, yeah, color is not that important in a dry fly, but actually color is. And I'll tell you why I say this. When a fish is coming up from the bottom, right, and it looks at the bottom and it sees the fly on top, I don't think color is that important then. I think profile and how the fly behaves in the drift is more important. But I think when the fly gets closer, when the fish gets closer to the fly, you know, and that window increases, I think color becomes a very important thing then. I think fish can discern between color, and I've seen it before, where our fish, there's a still water in South Africa called Sterkfontein, and there are beetles there. fish eat a lot of beetles, and there are two different types of beetles. There are these Christmas beetles. I don't know if you get them, these like bronze or copper colored beetles. And then you get this like black, purpley beetle. And I was fishing there the one day, and I fished one of these black beetles, and fish would come up and reject the fly. And I couldn't understand it. And my friend said, try a copper one. And I tried the copper one, and immediately, boom, fish. The only difference of those flies was the color. The materials were the same, everything. So it was just that one tiny little difference that made the difference. So color is important. You'll notice I've used sort of pinkish red legs here. Once again, sort of working on that whole trigger of the red underwing. Red in our hoppers is an important trigger. So a little bit of red in a hopper from a South African or an African context would be quite important. And this is typically where we fish these kind of things. So this is what our rivers look like. This is in Lesotho. This is the Bokong River. And imagine 40 kilometers of this. So that's typically the kind of fishing we have. This stuff is crystal clear. There's no pollution here. You can drink this water. There's a road over here that goes to a village, and then that's the end of the road. And then for the next 30 k's upstream, there's a donkey path that you have to walk up. You cannot get there with a vehicle. It doesn't exist. There's no pollution on this river. The fishing is just fantastic. And this is the kind of thing we catch there too, like big wild rainbows. I caught this on a size 18 dry. I sight fished it, by the way. Nice brownie.
Wow.
So healthy fish. He caught this fish on an ant. And this is these are yellowfish. So this is and look how clear that water is. So this is kind of what we do. We fish for these fish that migrate up there every spring. Yellowfish are a lot like European barbel. Same kind of thing, okay? And very, one of my favorite dries is this little Pararab type pattern. And it's very simple, just a coq de leon tail, a biot body, an elk or deer wing, and then in front, a bit of fine dubbing, just to keep that wing upright like that. Deadly. It's just a deadly, deadly pattern. Okay, next up, I want to look at a little ant pattern. I was thinking about ants, and I was thinking about how do I tie an ant that takes no time to tie and that taps into all the main triggers of an ant. Because on this river that we fish, ants are a major food source. I mean, you can catch fish on ants almost all the time. And a lot of people like hoppers tend to overcomplicate ants. So I thought about this and I thought, well, in essence, what is an ant? It's two balls with a thin waist. That's what an ant is. So I attempted to just, fit in with that and appeal to those triggers. So what I've done here is I lay a thread foundation on the shank, but I don't start at the eye of the hook. I start at the back, okay? I tie in a thin strip of foam. This is also lava lace foam, okay? Tie it in. It's important that you have a thread foundation when you're using foam, because if you don't do that, the foam won't seat, okay? Won't seat properly, and the fly won't be that durable. And then all I do is I fold that over, I tie it in, cut that off, and bring the thread forward. The main thing I want is a very thin waist. I haven't dubbed anything under there, nothing. You don't need to. I mean, if you want to make it neater, by all means, but fish really don't care. Next thing I do is I tie in a post on top of the hook shank. Notice the nice thread base, very important. Okay. Tie in a hackle. I like using a grizzly hackle because the lighter hackle doesn't mess with the profile of the fly. The two important things you want here are those balls separated by the thin waist. And when I tie this hackle in, I tie it with the shiny side facing me. And you'll notice here on the left side, I've stripped off some hackle fibers. And the reason I've done that is to establish the first wrap. There's nothing here preventing this hackle from wrapping in clean. Your first hackle wrap is your most important hackle wrap. Why? It establishes everything to follow. You get that wrong and everything else that follows is not cool. And I like tying it with a shiny side facing me so that those hackle fibers tilt up slightly. In that way, you're less likely to trap fibers while you're wrapping the hackle down, okay? And then next I use a bit of peacock dubbing and I just dub a very small thorax. And I end with the thread behind the post, hanging down on the side of the shank closest to me. And that's quite important, okay? Because it sets me up for tying off the hackle at the base of the post. It's a lot easier doing that than tying it off at the eye. It's less clunky. You know, if you tie it off at the eye, you've got to cut away material and always little fibers that get in the way. No good. So I wrap the hackle down. I think I've got 4 wraps here, and I tie it off at the base. And then I'll simply cut that off, and I'll whip finish it right there at the base. And then that's the finished fly. So the thing with ants that I always struggled with is, because I'm semi-blind, is I always struggle to see them. So with this whole thing, with the post, that problem disappears. From a profile perspective, that's what you've got going. So you've got those 2 balls. Look at the balls there, thin waist, and the lighter colored hackle fibers sort of simulate wings or legs or whatever the case is. But I think the 2 balls separated by the thin waist is the most important thing. I've never ever understood this concept of tying ants with 2 balls with a thick hackle in the middle. It's just, I've never understood it because it sort of takes away from the profile of the fly for me, you know? So we tied these things, and you can tie them in 3 minutes flat, and we hammered fish on them. You know, I'd been fishing this place for 5 years, and people had told me about this amazing ant hatch. It's not really an ant hatch. It's just, you know, where if conditions are favorable, ants emerge from the ground and form new colonies. So they start growing wings. And a lot of these ants end up in the river, and then fish go crazy. It's like, it's the most crazy thing. But I'd been hearing about this hatch, and I'd never seen one. I'd never ever seen an ant hatch, even though I'd been visiting this river for years and years and years. And then one day, I looked down from the contour path, and I looked at a pool, and it looked like there were 5 million fish rising. There were just risers everywhere. And the guide said to me, ant hatch. And I went down there and I took this fly, and it was just utter chaos. Every cast, a fish, boom, 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 clockwork. And the funny thing is that pool, I'd been fishing that same pool earlier on in the day, and the fish were all stacked up on the bottom, and they were looking down, and they didn't want to dry at all. I had to put in a small nymph and French nymph it through there, and then I got the odd fish, but not many. I think I took 4 or 5 fish from that pool, and there were like, I don't know, hundreds of fish stacked in it. And that evening, when those ants started appearing, it just turned them on. Boom. So yeah, so this is kind of my default ant pattern nowadays, you know. Obviously you can tweak this, you know, if you tie it smaller, but yeah, that's the kind of thing I'm using. very simple, you know, like anyone can tie this. You can take someone who hasn't tied flies before, and they can be tying this thing in half an hour. And this is typically what we catch. This is a yellowfish, very similar to European barbel. A lot of people, especially Americans, when they look at these things, say, no, we've got them. These are carp. There's nothing carp about this. I mean, it might look a bit like a carp from a color perspective in the scales, but if you look at the shape, look at that torpedo shape of that body, nothing carp about that. So yeah, and I mean, and you can catch these fish on size 20 dries. It's beautiful. So yeah. Any questions? Any questions?
Everybody's still muted.
Okay, so I beg your pardon?
Everybody's still muted.
Okay, no problem. I'm going to just put my speakers up a bit. Okay, so the point I wanted to just get across tonight is that one doesn't have to tie complicated patterns. You know, simplification is important. All you have to do is make sure that whatever you put on a hook is motivated. Keep it simple. Simple flies catch fish. If we look at things like pheasant tail nymphs, if we look like hare's ear nymphs, if we look at clink hammers, if we look at all these sort of things, F flies, they're effective. Why? And they'll always be effective because they do one thing. They do what they need to do. People like to get complicated, but if you think about this, everyone here has their favorite flies in their fly box. You've got those patterns that you fish over and over and over and over again, and that you're totally confident in. And very often, there's nothing special about them. You know, fly tying doesn't have to be complicated. So that's my message to you. Is like, keep it simple. See how few materials you can put on a hook and still catch fish with. I mean, I know the buzzer guys do that all the time. Who was that guy who used to tie the copper nymph? Basically a curved hook just with a couple of copper wraps, and he made a little copper head, and that was the fly. And he used to fish that under an indicator on still waters. I think I read about this as I was a kid. It must have been in the late 80s or early 90s. You know, simple, nothing to it. And that was buzzers. So keep it simple, keep it purpose driven, think about what you're doing, you know, and don't be scared to try new things. Yeah. Trout don't read books. I remember when I was a kid. No, they don't. Like my dad, I taught my dad how to fish, and he would always do the weirdest things. I remember the one day we were fishing a still water, and he was fishing a floating line with a humpy, and he was stripping this thing through the chop, through the waves, and he was hammering fish doing it. And that's not a traditional way of fishing a humpy, but it was highly effective, you know. So sometimes doing weird things will get you fish. So don't be scared of, you know, of going crazy. What I've always been amazed by, and I don't know if this is a South African thing, but especially with stillwater guys, what they'll often do is they'll stand in one spot and they'll fish, say a DI3 or a DI5 the whole day, and they'll strip their flies back in meter-long strips. And they'll sit there and they'll catch maybe a fish an hour, maybe something like that. And I've never understood that, because if you're doing the same thing over and over and over again and it's not working, then there's obviously something wrong. then you need to change. You need to try something else, you know. And if you're constantly doing that and thinking about it, you know, fishing is like basic science. If something doesn't work, try something else until something works, you know, but always be thinking about it. The environment will give you clues. And the main thing is to tap into that. A lot of people approach fishing with these preconceived ideas, but the very best teacher is nature itself. I mean, if you want to learn how to wade or approach a stream or a river, all you have to do is look at a heron. How does a heron move? A heron moves slowly. A heron moves purposefully and with intent. It knows what it wants to do.
Yeah.
And if you wade like that, it will catch fish. Look at the position of the bird as well. It's not standing loud and proud. It's crouching. It's keeping low. I remember I was fishing with a guy about a month ago, and we were fishing for these yellowfish. And I put him on a sort of a gravel bed, and there were lots of fish in front of him. And he stood up and he was casting. And I said to him, John, get down. These things can see you. And he said, no, he hates fishing like that. He wants to stand up. And he could not touch a fish. You know, he couldn't touch a fish. And I was standing just a little bit up ahead of him. And I was catching a lot of fish. But I also was not visible. I was creeped behind a bush. I'm not even making long casts. I was catching them right under my nose. You know, and like the one thing is his leader configuration was wrong because he wasn't turning it over properly. You know, he was battling, so he's using a lot of energy trying to turn over this leader that didn't want to turn over. And I said to him, John, just fix your leader. You need another 3 foot of 6x. You put that on, that leader will turn. Just, you know, you need that. And small detail like that, you know, can make a massive difference. Sinking the tippet. I mean, I had a fight with a friend this week who said, no, you mustn't sink tippets. They need to float. The whole tippet needs to float. And what I've noticed is, especially in bright, sunny conditions, is that a floating tippet, generally a fish will reject the fly. Sink the tippet and that problem disappears. He'll eat the fly. And when you fish places like the Bokom where there are thousands of fish, you get to actually test this on live fish. The fish will tell you what they want. You know, if you throw something at a sighted fish, you can see what he does or what he doesn't do. You know, and that will tell you. That'll give you information. If you looked at the way Sawyer fished, Sawyer wasn't an academic. He wasn't. Sawyer was a naturalist. He basically looked at his environment and he slotted into that. And he took his cues and his clues from that. I'm not saying don't read, but what a lot of people do is they read and they accept everything they read as gospel. And what I'm trying to tell you is there's a lot of shit out there, you know? So, no, but there's a lot of shit out there. There's a lot of people giving you misinformation. Even people who've invented specific flies, they will, when they write about the fly, they'll write certain things. They'll say, oh no, the tail's 2 times the length of the shank, or this or that. And then you look at the actual fly that they've tied and you realize that they're talking shit. It's not. It's the tail's as long as the shank, but they've written it's twice the length of the shank. So a lot can be lost in the written word, you know. So don't just believe everything you read. Try things out for yourself. Fly fishing and fly tying is a lot like swimming, you know. When you swim, imagine if I had to tell you, Derek, you need to learn to swim via textbook, okay? Here's a book, read it, go swim. You'd probably end up drowning. Why? Because swimming is something you need to do in water.
Yeah, naturally.
You know, and that's common sense. But so is fly tying. Fly tying is not just about what you do at your vice. It's about what you take away from observation, and that you your interpretation of that happens at the vice, and you keep on going from the water to the vice, water, vice, water, vice, and eventually you start tying these flies, which are highly effective because you're slotting into what's happening. You know, very often people view themselves as an external factor or external entity from their environment when they're fishing. But if you think of yourself as part of the food chain, then you start slotting into things. You are as much a predator as a heron is, you know. So yeah, that's quite important. And there's a lot of contextual stuff happening too, you know. I look at rivers are like friends. They change with the seasons, with events, with, you know, you might go to one of my favorite pools on the Eerste River near where I live, right? Every season that pool changes. One season it's full, it's got a lot of water in, and I can catch fish under the palmit, under these like plants that hang over. I can catch them with streamers, casting them under there, letting it sink and just stripping it in. I went there the other day, there's hardly any water in that place, you know. So they're changing, and you've got to adapt to what's in front of you. You know, very often you'll go to a fishery and you'll hammer fish on a particular fly. And the next time you go there, what will you do? You'll tie on that exact same fly you caught with last time. You know, even though things have changed, you haven't. So observation, being plugged in is quite important. Figure it out for yourself. That's the nice thing about fishing. You know, it's sure you can approach it like fishing by numbers, and you'll catch some fish, and that's great. Or you can think about it and start applying yourself. And for me, that whole chess game is what keeps me excited. You know, the whole thinking the whole time, thinking, what next? How, you know, if this is not working, what must I do? How do I approach this? And I try, and very often I try things that I'm not comfortable with. Like, I love fishing a dry fly. But the other day I was faced with a situation where I realized in this particular current I was fishing it, like a dry wouldn't work at all. And fishing a nymph with a strike indicator wouldn't be effective at all either. So I fished a French nymph. I was Euro nymphing through there. And it was extremely effective. You know, the other day I was fishing this river, and I was fishing the I was fishing the tails of these pools, and it was extremely thin. And I was fishing single nymphs, like size 80 nymphs, with like 1.5 mil, 2 mil beads, like tiny. And I was fishing them on a French leader, looking at the fish, sight fishing to these things. And it was so nice picking off fish with a lightly weighted nymph, just doing that, you know. So, and it's a method I'd never really worked on or, you know, spent time on. And I decided I'm going to spend time on this. I'm going to, you know, crack this. I'm going to like understand this better. So yeah. Does anyone want to add anything?
Nobody,
Okay,
no
so that.
questions?
No, it's fine. It's making a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see your slant on fishing and materials and your approach. Yeah, it's good.
So yeah, so that's basically, you know, that's basically how I approach it. It's a very simple way of looking at things. Yeah.
Best way to do it, keep it simple.
Yeah,
Keep it simple.
My teacher always used to say that simple is best.
Yeah, because there are less things to mess up, you see.
Yeah.
So
There's-
yeah,
There's an expression over here, they call it KISS. And it means keep it simple, stupid.
there was actually, when we had our first democratic elections in 1994, there was a woman in South Africa who owned 6 dogs and 4 donkeys and started her own political party. And she called it KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Obviously, she only got 3 votes, but I did like her idea.
Oh dear.
So yeah. So that's basically it. That's all I want to do. You know, I mean, I can tie these extravagant patterns and I can show you these things and I can weave bodies and I can go crazy. But at the end of the day, it's all about tying a purpose-driven fly. One doesn't have to get stuck in elaborate technique. You don't. There's not that much to know. I said this to someone the other day, and he like said, "How can you say that?" I said, "The basics are the basics, you know, and everything else are variations on a theme. If you understand the basics, the science of what makes a fly sink? You want to get a small fly down to fish. What makes it sink? A lack of resistance and design, the actual shape of the fly.
Yeah.
People think you need a lot of weight to get things to sink. But the design has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
You know,
Skinny. Yeah.
Skinny, short tail, few fibers. Why? Because there's less resistance.
Yeah.
That's a scientific thing. You know, look at the shape of a perdigon. What is it shaped like? Think about this. It's shaped like a drop, a raindrop, or a comet.
Yeah.
If you look at nature, if you look at the way nymphs are designed, the way an insect or a creature is designed will tell you a lot about how that thing behaves. Let me give you an example. Damselfly nymphs. Damselfly nymphs have underslung jaws, right? Why? Has anyone ever thought about why they have underslung jaws? Because they ambush predators. Very often they're just sitting around in weed beds waiting for things to swim past them and that they zap them like chameleons. You know, very often, and in the South African context, a lot of guys are always moving damsels, moving, cast, move, and they fish them way too fast, you know. Damsels move for the following reasons. When you scare them, when they're spooked, they move sometimes when they're moving from weed bed to weed bed, or when they're migrating, when they're going to shore. But for the most part, they're not moving that much, you know, they're just sitting there. So thinking about that, patterns with neutral density. I've always looked at the British magazines, and they've always got these damselfly nymphs with these big beads. Those aren't damselfly nymphs. Those are olive lures. I mean, it's as simple as that. It doesn't imitate the damsel. Damsels don't move like this. They don't move like a jig. They've got neutral density. You just need to look at one to understand that, you know. So yeah. So insects are designed for their purpose. If you look at mayfly nymphs, clingers are flat. Why? Because they need to cling to things. Burrowers have fatter legs. Why? Because they're using their legs to dig the whole time. Swimmers, thinner abdomens, lots of gills. Why? Because they need to be mobile. They need to move. So everything is designed with a purpose. And if you emulate that when you're tying the flies, well, you know, then you're going to do well. But like I said, don't be scared to do crazy things. Pink beads. I mean, there isn't a single nymph that is pink. But you put a pink bead on a pheasant tail nymph and you will smack grayling on that thing. Pink beads work. So don't be afraid to, you know, not all things that fish eat they're eating because they look like a food form. There's a lot of things fish will just take in and expel in the drift. They need to test things with their mouths. So that's why if you look at all these Euro nymphs, a friend of mine calls them Quasimodo nymphs. He says they don't look like nymphs at all. The shape's all wrong, and he's right, you know. But the point is they catch a shitload of fish. Why? Because they get to the fish. And also, I don't think fish are as discriminatory as we think they are, you know. There's a lot of, back in the day, we used to kill fish, okay? When I was a little kid, we used to kill almost every fish we caught. We'd hammer it over the head with a priest, and we'd gut them. And you found some weird shit in these fish some days. Cigarette butts, paper wrappers, the odd snake, weird stuff, you know. So yeah. Okay, so that's basically all I want to share with you tonight. And yeah.
Cheers, Gordon.
Yeah, really good. Thank you.
Listen, if anyone has any questions that you think about afterwards, you can email me. I'm going to give you my email address. I'm going to quickly type it in here. So this is my email address. I'm typing it right now. At gmail.com. Okay. Okay, with a small letter G, sorry. So check that out. And yeah, if you want to ask anything, if there's anything I've forgotten or anything that comes up later for you, ask me, no problem. And yeah, so thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Gordon.
Did you put
Thank you,
that
Gordon. Very
did you
good.
put that in the chat, Gordon?
Thank you.
I beg your pardon?
Did you put it in the chat? 'Cause
I put it in the chat.
I've got gordon.brandishbay@gmail.com.
That's it, but a small G.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a
And
big G.
the other one I've got is feathermechanic@gmail.com.
Use this one. Use my personal address.
Yeah,
It'll be better.
magic.
So yeah.
Gordon, before you go,
Yes.
many years ago, I've always been a river fisherman, and I'm going to pick up on your point where you talk about a fast retrieve.
Mm-hmm.
When I treated myself about 15 years ago to go up north of the border up into Scotland to fish the locks, I took my river equipment and I fished exactly the same way I would fish the rivers down here and caught nothing. The second year, I got a gilly on board, and he said to me straight away, "You're a river fisherman from the south." I said, "Yes." He said, "That's because you're fishing the locks like a river. The only way you'll catch trout on the Scottish loch is by a fast retrieve, and 3 meter straight away, and then the fish are caught. And of course, you had to have 2 droppers and the point fly. And that was the difference between the river fishing and the Scottish lochs. The Scottish lochs, you fish fast and on the sides, not right in the middle of the loch. So that was the only time that I ever, I still do it. I fish a fast retrieve on the Scottish loch. Ever come across that?
You know what? It's quite a contextual thing. I'll give you an example. There are times when a fast retrieve works well. I was talking to someone about this today. On some of the biggest still waters we have here, one of the techniques that can very often work quite well is to fish a muddler in a chop, okay, and to roly-poly the muddler back. And the pattern is tied with a sort of a foam underbody with mylar tubing, pearl mylar tubing brought over it. It'll have a wing of say an elk or deer hair wing, and then obviously the deer hair head. And you'll cast this thing out and you'll roly-poly it back. And it'll create a lot of disturbance on the surface. And then the fish will just come out of nowhere and eat that thing.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's totally contextual. If you fish a small still water and you strip fish, and I'm talking, and you fish a small still water that sees a lot of traffic, and you strip flies through there the whole day, you'll see eventually it won't work anymore. You know, that's why you guys fish these buzzers, right? Slowly. It depends on the context. It also depends on angling pressure. It depends on whether the fish are stocked or not. It depends on food density. I mean, I don't know how rich these lochs are in insect life, but we've got some places in South Africa, like our streams, for instance. Our insect life on the Cape streams where I live isn't that great. So fish are extremely opportunistic, you know. Whereas if you go to somewhere like the Henry's Fork in Idaho, hatches are intense. So the fishing tends to be a lot different. It's a lot more imitative. You're fishing the hatches as they're happening. You're changing according to what's happening in the hatch. So it's a very contextual thing. You've got to basically fish to to what's in front of you, and like fast fishing flies fast is not natural, but it works. And that's what I was saying just now about sometimes crazy things work extremely well. There's another thing that when I was in America in 2016, one of the kids, I was fishing with one of the USA junior fly fishing guys, and he was telling me about a dapping technique that they were using in rivers. And we've got this fly in South Africa called a Pararab. If Google it, you'll see it. It's this crazy looking thing. And what they were doing is they were using this Pararab, but they would fish a nymph on the point, and then they would have a dropper, like 30 centimeter dropper, top dropper with a dry fly, like a bushy dry fly. And they would Euro-nymph it, just conventional Euro-nymphing. But then what they would do is the nymph would be an anchor, and they would manipulate the rod tip and basically dap with the dry fly in the drift. Now, when they showed me that, I immediately thought back to home. We've got these net-veined midges, and they sort of hover above the water and occasionally touch the water, but they're never on the water. They're sort of just hovering. And immediately when I looked at that, I thought, hey, I can use this technique for these net-veined midges, where you just dap with the fly. You know, the fly coming on and off the water, like works like a bomb. And I've caught a lot of fish doing that. So yeah, things. But I would have never thought of that. I would have never thought of dapping a fly in a river. You know, that's something you do on a loch or a, you know. But you can transpose that to the river as well, obviously. So yeah.
I think the other thing on the Scottish lochs really is depending on what the vegetation is around it. If it's all rocks, there's not so much supply life. But if it's all vegetation, like rolling hills, like the lower lochs, then you get the mayfly and you get all sorts of stuff. But his statement was that because there's no life, they're all searching for the food. So as soon as they see it, they're after it. And the faster it's going across, they get to it. And it's worked for the last 20 years anyway.
No, that makes total sense. It's total sense.
Good.
So yeah, those lochs have appealed to me since I was a kid. And I'd love to fish a loch one day. I mean, I think it's the ultimate, catching wild little brown trouts out of a loch.
And they're all wild, none of them are stocked.
I know. I'm not a fan of a stocked fish. You know, obviously, like if you have to, you have to. But like the rivers I fish are wild. They haven't been stocked since, I don't know, 1920. So I mean, I'm not saying don't fish for stockies. I mean, if that's all you have, fish for them. But like a wild fish is cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
So yeah.
Call it a night there then.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gordon.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you, Gordon. Lovely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers,
Okay.
good.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.